Windhorse is our innate ability to uplift ourselves and our environment by giving rise to a positive energy that is both relaxed and disciplined. Since 1981, Windhorse Community Services has integrated this understanding with modern conventional therapies, meditation, and contemplative traditions in the development of at-home, whole-person mental health recovery. Windhorse Journal is dedicated to the mission of communicating decades of clinical and personal experience to professionals, educators, students, and anyone seeking recovery options. Please join the dialogue.
Welcome to the 7th podcast in our series on Basic Attendance and Windhorse team roles. Today's conversation is about the role of Team Supervisor, the most senior position on our team. In this discussion, the group looks back on one team's journey and the relationships built within the team environment, the family, and the client. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this podcast of the Windhorse Journal. I'm your host, Chuck Knapp, and today's discussion, which focuses on the role of the team supervisor, is the 7th in our series on the clinical roles of the therapeutic team. I'm so pleased to be here with this group of such deeply experienced Windhorse practitioners today, and I'll introduce them to you now. Blake Baily has worked and volunteered in the mental health field since 1987, earning his master's degree from Europa University, where he continued to teach for 8 years. He's been with Windhorse Community Services since 2002, is a certified mindfulness instructor, and his primary team roles are as an intensive psychotherapist and team supervisor. Blake lives in Boulder with his talented and courageous daughters, Azalea and Frida. Gabrielle Bershen started working at Windhorse in 1999, and immediately prior to that, she had designed and supervised a new program at Duke University Addictions Clinic, where she introduced mindfulness and art therapy practices in the treatment of substance abuse. As a longtime practitioner of meditation, Gabrielle is a community leader in exploring how the contemplative basis of our approach fosters compassion and clarity in our staff. She particularly loves working with the families of our clients. Jeanne Christensen has been with Windhorse Community Services since 2004, and for many years prior to that worked as a senior psychotherapist and case manager at the local community mental health center in Boulder. Along with her extensive experience within the Windhorse Approach, Jeanne combines a deep understanding of traditional approaches in mental health treatment with the Windhorse model. Jeanne's primary roles are as intensive psychotherapist and team supervisor. And Jeanne, you also just began working as a member of our admissions team. Jack Gipple is the clinical services manager of Windhorse Community Services and has worked extensively with issues related to behavioral and substance addictions, as well as a wide range of mental health challenges. Jack has particular expertise in group dynamics, has co-authored an article on group dynamics within Windhorse therapeutic environments, and is a longtime practitioner of Tai Chi Chuan. Jack's primary roles are also psychotherapist and team supervisor. I think that's pretty much everybody's primary roles at this point in this group. Thank you all for being here today. Really appreciate sharing this time with you. And Gabrielle, if you would please start us off with describing what a team supervisor does.
So I'm just going to do broad strokes of the team supervisor role on a team. And every team is pretty individual at Windhorse. So the supervisor role can be, the requirements of it can vary according to the team environment. But the three main kind of functions is clinical supervision of the team, which in my view means looking out for the basic health of the team functioning and everyone involved in the team. So that sounds very kind of perhaps abstract, but there's lots of aspects to that in terms of tending to the relationships within the team, with staff and client and family, team and family. So the team supervisor is not so much involved in some of the team details as much as team leaders and even intensive psychotherapists, but it's more of a big view position of uh, the team, the environment of the team, and all the people involved with the team. So that's a big part of being a team supervisor. The team supervisor is also the liaison between the team and the family. The way the etiquette of the communication is through the team supervisor. That's how we like to organize it in Boulder, where families talk primarily to the team supervisor on some kind of rhythm, which varies from family to family about what's going on. And often that includes explaining Windhorse to families because it can be hard to understand if you're not actually directly experiencing it. And so, over the course of time, helping families to understand what the team is and what the team is doing. And then the third aspect of the role is overseeing budgets and money and that bills are paid and that if there's an expansion on the team or there's a reduction on the team, that taking care of general staffing and if families have questions about the bill, being available to discuss those. So that's uh, the financial money piece of being a team supervisor. So I think that's what I'll say for now about what we do in our role. Maybe somebody wants to embellish or add to that. I don't know.
I could just add that the team supervisor also can end up being quite a support person for the family
Mhm,
that's involved, and that can oftentimes turn into a long-standing relationship.
mhm.
Anything else about the description of the role?
I think there's one thing that I might add that has to do with the team supervisor's position on the team and the way that the team supervisor might be viewed by the client. There's a special relationship that can develop between the client and the team supervisor as well, which can be a pretty corrective situation for the client to relate to someone who's kind of at the top of the structure, but finding that it's different from maybe their previous experiences of working within a hierarchy, like a family system, or maybe a work situation that had gone bad for them or difficult. So working through those types of challenges.
This is great. Thank you. And Gabrielle, thanks. That was a nice summary there. I especially like the financial piece, which we might come back to because we really do try to help protect families' resources. That's a big deal, just to make sure that we're pacing what we're trying to do with what the resources are.
Mm.
Jack, I think you may want to start us off here with a bit of a story that could bring this to life.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. Chuck had asked me to talk about something from, bring up a kind of vignette that we could all talk about, and the kind of example of at least my understanding of TS work and my path with one particular team. I'm gonna bring up this young woman I worked with some years ago now. She came from out of state and was dealing with a really severe depression that was very, very isolated and actually extremely alienated from everybody, including her family. And the isolation was so much that she was having what we would call kind of extreme states. It was bringing up internal kind of dream images and intensifications of states of mind and really questioning her reality. And she had completed an undergraduate degree, was highly educated, and by the time she came to us, she was in a really isolated, painful place. And the initial team and some of what I guess I'll describe as like phases of the team that I stayed with her through. The early phase of the team, we had a housemate and we had a couple of people doing basic attendance. I was the team supervisor, and then one of our female staff was the intensive psychotherapist. And part of the way, she was a very intelligent woman and very critical. And so early on in the team, I was often, kind of going to, I think what you were saying, Blake, was, working out things with the parental figure. She had a great deal of trouble with me. So early in the team, and I should say, I should refer to her as Kari, and it's not her actual name. For obvious reasons, we're not using actual names, but Kari was especially critical of me and critical of the entire team, honestly. The housemate somehow was exempt, that they luckily got along fairly well, although Kari was quite withdrawn at times. And in this kind of early phase of the team, there was a lot of, I felt, interesting because I felt very like parentified and a lot of authority projections on me. And so, you tend to respond in kind. And I understood that that's what she needed from me, was this. And it was very, I could say the most innocuous things, and she would just go after me. And she was quite smart, and I would say smarter than me. And so she would just take me to town sometimes, and I had to just stay with it. And I understood that she had, and from what I knew of her family, that this was also how she had related with her parents. I should say her parents were divorced. They seemed to have a good, amicable divorce, but they were separated. So in this phase of the team where we still had a housemate, you could say this was the large phase of the team. And this is not uncommon, where you start with a larger team. And I like to say that we build teams so we can take them apart and reduce them. So in this first phase, it went on for over a year. Kari had this Windhorse housemate, and they started to go out and do things together. Would be active in the community, went to various functions at the local universities, and then that eventually ended, and I was more of a little separate figure. I would meet with the parents, met a few times with the psychotherapist and Kari and the parents. And then the team shrunk. Kari was doing much better, as far as starting to, get out into the community a little more. Had been completely opposed to any psychiatric medications, and she began to accept some, to try some. Actually, she tried them, hated them, and actually got much better while she was taking some of these antidepressant, and didn't see it in herself. And then she went off the medications and actually became much more withdrawn after that. There was a period where, especially because of the parents' relationship and the divorce and issues around that, the psychotherapist and I started to do basically kind of co-therapy with Kari. And so I entered in to do more, psychotherapy. So like you were talking about earlier, instead of just being an external, supervisor figure, I started to move in more into the team. The team shrank. The parents, in particular, had a really difficult relationship with her, and he was trying to be fairly authoritative, very nice, kind man, and academic. And he was coming at her in this very intellectual, academic way that really didn't help. It actually set up a lot of conflict. So there was a period where I was meeting them as a TS. I would meet with the family and really just helped to try to listen to where they were at and what they experienced their daughter as. And then over time, also to do a little bit of, I would call it like psychoeducation, like help them understand kinds of personalities, what are the kind of flavors of personality and depression. So there was a whole education, and they were very open to that and curious. And the father, to his credit, was really able to implement a lot of what we discussed over time. And he would ask for coachings of ideas of how to approach his daughter. And then there was a period actually where the psychotherapist and me were the only members of the team left. So we're kind of moving into a later phase. And then the team shrunk down again, and it ended up that I was the remaining, I was kind of both the team supervisor, because there's no team to supervise anymore, but I had a relationship with the parents. The psychotherapist and the client agreed to end their work together. So at this point, I was the sole psychotherapist. And it was interesting because we would have meetings. Mostly Kari would not meet with me and her parents. I would meet with the parents, and I would meet with Kari, and I had to be very careful of keeping respectful separations and explaining to both of them, and have, build their trust, and, be honest, that I wasn't spilling back and forth. And they did trust me, and I guess I believe you can't lie to people, that the unconscious knows everything. And so I tried to be extremely honest about things. And if, there was at one point where I actually did make a kind of rupture of information, and I had to completely admit to it and cop to it, which actually helped Kari trust me much more. And the Kari left at some point. She ended with me, and then actually after several months, she chose to come back and work with me again. And at that point, I would say that she was now in therapy with me of her own volition. Up to that point, there was always a sense that she'd been forced into it by her parents. So she needed to leave, I think, for a while, and then she could come back and access our relationship. So, I'm no longer exactly a psychotherapist or team supervisor here to Kari. I'm being a therapist, but to the parents, it was really important, and I have two adult daughters, and so I could speak to them as a parent and about things that they had gone through and things I had gone through. So we really formed a close relationship. And I really came to just look forward to when I did talk to them, and enjoyed meeting with them and helping hear what they're going through, and things that were working and things that weren't. And there's always periods of what seemed like backsliding, and then of moving forward into new territory. Kari eventually started to work, and there was a few cycles of her leaving and then returning to working with me. And it's actually been a couple of years since I've seen her at this point, but kind of there's a broad strokes of a fairly long relationship with someone.
Jack, how long was it all together, would you say?
Oh, gosh, it was over 5 years, I would say. But the intensive team phase was probably a year and a half, and then there was a much lighter middle phase, maybe lasted another 9 months. So that's probably a little over 2 years was with other people in the team, and then the tail end. Sometimes Kari and I would meet twice a week, sometimes once a week, and later on every other week, I would meet with her parents. I think it was monthly. We met monthly. So the bulk of the most of that 5 years was actually a pretty light team. So it was kind of follow up, and they needed relationship to understand their daughter. I think before that they were trying to force her into roles and norms and expectations, and they needed somebody who cared about them, and they felt that I cared about their daughter, and that had some relational credibility with them. They just needed that relationship to help them, move their relationships forward.
Could you say something about their relationship currently, or where it was when you last left off?
Let's see. When I last met with them, I had actually stopped meeting with the parents, and we'd officially ended that relationship. And I was meeting with Kari instead. And it was important because I think that Kari had really separated from her parents and needed a therapist who was her therapist. And she felt like, that I was her therapist. So, but at the end of the parents' relationship, I felt like they were much better divorced co-parents than they had been when I first met them. And we set up I'm trying to remember, we set up kind of agreements and patterns of communication between them that really help them stay in communication with each other. Their relationship, especially the dad's relationship with Kari, was improved. It hadn't been, it had been actually pretty impaired when we first started working together. And Kari really needed that relationship. So for a while, she used, me. I was some kind of bridge in that. The way I think of it, and then I could withdraw. And they were speaking regularly, Kari and her father. So
Thank you.
I think this team is an illustration of how fluid the team supervisor role can be in terms of, we start out in a certain way, but depending on the needs of the situation, we move in, we move out, we do family work. Yeah. So that's true of this particular situation.
And it seems to really highlight that role of the communication piece and teaching sometimes concrete ways how to communicate with your parents and teaching parents how to communicate with their kid. And it can get as simple as, okay, we're going to schedule a 5-minute phone call once a week, and you're just going to talk about the movie that you saw, or what you cooked for breakfast, and that's where you're going to keep it. You're going to keep the conversation at that level, and just practice talking, and then do that for 6 months, and it's incredible, what can come out of that.
Yeah.
And what's going to end in 5 minutes. So you can see the light at the end of the tunnel right when the call starts. And it can be very, very repairing for those relationships that seem irreparable sometimes.
I think you're right, Blake. It's like some of just getting a conversation going. What you're talking about often is less important. I'm not sure that people understand that. And if people listen to the content of psychotherapy sessions or team meetings, there might be times they would judge it as like, well, what are they? They're just talking about, sounds like ordinary daily things. I think sometimes there's this idea that people need to be doing therapy. It needs to sound like every minute is some kind of intensive interaction and you're doing a method and a technique. Boy, for Kari, that did not work. If you came in, straight at Kari with something that smacked of being a therapist, she just had no time for that. It was just insulting to her to treat her that way. It was really important to have a human conversation. And she needed help to not, she was very smart and often would go too intense and she would lead the way into too much intensity with her father in particular. So she needed help to back it out and to have a more ordinary conversation,
Jack, I have a question about what happened with her medications. So she had a psychiatrist, and was this person, oftentimes the psychotherapist will have more role with the psychiatrist, but you kind of evolving into that. How did that work?
Early on, she rejected the psychiatrist and rejected the whole paradigm of psychiatric medications. I think she had an especially difficult path working with a really deeply rooted depression without the benefit of psychiatric medications. So that you could say on one hand, you could say that slowed everything down. On the other hand, it was that she did not want to be somebody who took psychiatric medications, and she worked really hard. I would often say, okay, you don't have to, you don't have to take medications. They can make some things easier, but if you choose not to, that means you have to really double down on self-care, and luckily she didn't have substance issues, was actually had a kind of an intelligent, I want to say phobia, but just like repelled by using alcohol or other drugs or marijuana, just like that. I thought that was always really intelligent of her. It was a much harder path because she didn't take psychiatric medication. She tried them at 2 times, I should say, through the course of it. I thought she improved greatly, and she didn't. And she went off, and in both times, I thought that things got much harder when she went off them. But she was able to endure, and I respect that.
Yeah. Yeah. This was a really good example, actually a great example of the arc of a team and the the ins and outs of all this, and like we're saying, the fluidity of this particular role to just tune into what's needed from start to finish as the team adjusts. Now, before I go on, does anybody have anything more they want to say? You gave us a lot to work with, Jack. That was really cool.
Good.
So on this notion of fluidity, we are, of course, we're a home-based mental health service. Okay, we provide mental health services, and I think one of our true strengths is to create very specifically tailored teams to the person that's coming in wanting to be with us, but also to their family. And I think I'm very curious how you all would experience, either Jack, you with this story, or anybody else having something they would say about how we tailor from the beginning to the end in this kind of whole process. It's a very general question, but this is what we do. So I'm just curious how you all approach that.
Oftentimes, as the team supervisor, I try to understand the needs of the various different players. Like sometimes the family is wanting something different than what the client wants, what they're hoping to get out of this experience. And so that really informs things like the size of the team and the different players on the team, who's doing what, kind of the, projecting around like how long of a team, how long it can be in place according to the budget, that kind of thing.
And Jeanne, it's interesting, you're in admissions now, so you watch this process right off the bat.
I am, yeah. I'm seeing a lot of how that kind of magic happens around forming teams and thinking about who might be a good fit for that person and for that family.
So that's kind of the beginning stage of that. And then, I don't know, the team, as you were describing, Jack, continues to change over time as the needs change.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's right away. I think you start a new team, you start to set up the configuration, the meetings of how we're all going to relate. You start to set up the society of the team, and oftentimes, admissions is doing a tremendous amount of shaping. It's hard to describe how significant the work that they do is, and then they pass it off to us, in the teams, and we have, immediately I think of like we become the experts, and admissions very quickly recedes and lets go, and then the team, and especially the team supervisor, has to speak honestly to what's going on and how, the admissions might have been dealing with someone who's, living in another state. That's not uncommon. And so they're doing the best they can. But when the person arrives in town and they start, moving around this town and this space and this team, then we get to know them very quickly on a much deeper level. And there's very frequently retailoring of the team that's required. Oh, this is way too big a team. Why do we need to have so many shifts? This isn't quite right. Or, oh, this is way too small. We need much more. So that almost immediately happens. There's some adjusting of all of this. And it's the team supervisor's job is to speak honestly and truthfully to the family system, which may include, very hard conversations about money and how money's being structured. Like maybe, it seems like increasingly over the years, we have clients who have not had a lot of limits put on their personal money. Like they just have money that's available to them, maybe because that's the family system, that the family is wealthy enough that they have money. Boy, that can be so damaging to someone to have too much access to money. So the team supervisor has to come in and help reconfigure the family norms around money and have conversations with the parents about how that affects their loved one.
In terms of tailoring, I know I pay attention to, because Windhorse is, we lead with the relationships that we create with the client, with the family, and with each other. But with clients, I notice I pay attention to their ability to stay in contact, so admissions may hand us a format that has so many hours of contact, and then that will get tweaked and molded according to the need of that person and their ability to be in contact, which you don't really know what it is until the person is here and you're working together with them. So that's an aspect that I always feel that I'm looking at. My experience with admissions over the years has been mostly that, not on every team, but that teams will come in and I'll say right at the get-go, we need more to start. We need a little bit more ballast in the system to start. And then with the eye to, and this is part of our flexibility, we can reduce staffing or reduce numbers of hours, or get that client more connected with community programs or work or whatever. But yeah.
When I hear this tailoring of teams, I always wonder who the tailor is. And my first thought is that the client is the head tailor of this team, and we're taking cues from the client, but the team supervisor has to watch that really carefully. And the image is that the dummy with the cloth over it, and you're working and sewing and cutting and creating something, but it's not going to really be a work of art or a beautiful gown until the client tries it on. And so we got to get feedback and listen really carefully about what this person's telling us and what they're saying with their words and with their behavior. And that's what's really cool about Windhorse, is that we do make those adjustments, and we make them in real time, and we stay in relationship around those adjustments and minor stitches and major. I'm not a tailor, but I do appreciate the art form. And so I just wanted to say something about how the client really is at the center of this circle and is directing his or her or their treatment.
But if I'm right, Blake, you're not saying, how would I put this? Yeah, I think you're making this distinction, but it's worth pointing out. You're not saying they're saying, yeah, get rid of that person, change that, make this, it's not that level necessarily. It's the team and the supervisor in particularly need to listen on all channels. Not, it's not that the person's directing traffic and we're in fact, that would actually be a really bad way to tailor a team, I would say.
Well, it makes me think of something you were talking about in your vignette, Jack, just around that client, Carly. She didn't want to take medications.
Yeah.
So that was a major sort of tailoring effort on her part.
Mm-hmm.
And then, a lot of times family members will get really frustrated and just think, well, gosh, if only you took medications, you'd be better and everything would be fine. And, treatment wouldn't have to last so long, and you get a job and everything would be okay and all of that. And so I'm thinking a lot of that tailoring or that arc of treatment is around helping the family member work with their responses to the client, work with their grief and their acceptance around that this is an adult who's trying to direct their own life, and that can be difficult for family members.
Yeah, especially I think things, it's not a rapid fix, a Windhorse team. I just want to say that it expectations by family can be high in terms of like what you were saying, Jeannie, get a job and take meds and everything will work out. But yeah, I just wanted to say the kind of slow, it's not a slam dunk, a Windhorse team in terms of it takes some time for the team to meld, the client to marinate in the healing environment of the team, and for the whole thing to start cooking together it's like making a good beef bourguignon or something. It takes time for the flavors to develop. Yeah.
I want to play with the analogy of the tailor and this role, how we're looking at the whole environment. I do team supervision work too, and so much of this is really looking at the whole environment and how it's talking. There's certainly the client's energy is central, especially in the beginning. It becomes more just a part of the circle after a while. Once they're kind of settled and seated and feeling more confident, they really join the group. At the same time, there's changes that are going about. So we're constantly kind of looking at what they're saying, what the team relationships are saying, what the family is saying, and we adjust and accordingly as these things go along. And I'm curious how what you were just touching on about helping a family understand, likewise the client, but maybe focusing on the family here, how to help a family understand what that beef bourguignon is. How does that process build, and what are you looking for as far as recovery aspects that let you know it's time to move to a different place? It's kind of leading by following sometimes, and sometimes you're creating a little bit more something. Anyway, I'm curious what you all think of that, if you can make a question out of that.
Yeah, on the team, like the team members, and especially we get a lot of information in team meetings around how things are working and what changes are happening. And a lot of times we talk about like markers of growth that we can see in the Windhorse team. Maybe the family doesn't quite know about those. If they're in a different state, they're far away from the situation. And so it's important to kind of keep that communication going around, like even small changes. We might notice that seem very significant, but they might be small-ish looking changes, but they're still significant. And so the more we can notice those positive changes back to the family members, then there's some, that understanding develops, like that the stew starts to get more flavor as they see these increments of changes happening over time, like positive change. Change is a funny thing. I read through the Windhorse Guide to Families before we did this recording, again, just to refresh myself about the messages we're putting out there to families. And so much of that is around accepting where somebody is in the here and now. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, the whole reason somebody's coming into treatment is, the idea is that change needs to happen in this person's life. So I was struck by how we could talk about change in a way like where positive changes happen in the person's life, but the person doesn't have to change. The person needs to be accepted in the present, here and now.
Personally, I find gradual change I trust more. Slow, sustained changes, maybe, maybe a little bit of regression, then moving forward, but like a constant process of that is much, there are times where a client will make a giant leap and it feels like just kind of build up to a collapse. I mean, that can happen where I can think of this one family I worked with actually over a period of time where their son would, we would say, okay, you want to go back to school? That's great. Take one class. Just take one class. And then over and over, he would take 3 classes at the parents' encouragement because they really wanted him to get back to school. They really, really wanted him back in school. And then, 3 weeks in, he would withdraw from one class, then another, and then another. And then he would have an utter sense of failure and fall back into depression. And they repeated this process over and over. It was very difficult. I was like, let's just do it really slowly, like one class at a time will help sustain that. Confidence, success leads to success. Confidence builds on little confidences. So, I guess that's the slow recipe, the slow cooking recipe is instead of just throwing it on the hot grill and cook it fast. It often is fast. Fast is actually slower.
I was just going to tell a little story about a client I've worked with a while, and the team has gone through some changes, some tailoring, and this client, the way he showed up, relationships was to solely talk about himself, actually to pontificate quite a bit about himself or about subject matters of various sort. Very bright person and knew a lot about all kinds of different things. But one day in the last year, one of the team counselors came in and said, he asked me how I was. And we're all kind of sitting there, kind of, it was maybe seems like nothing, but it was kind of everything. And that started to happen, not just with her, but with his therapist, and it was actually concurrent with a process where he started to go to work after not working. And so there was some connection there, but it was a beautiful moment of when she said, he asked me how I am. And somebody who was so absorbed in his own self was able to notice the person with him and inquire about their well-being. Yeah.
So tailoring, we're using this image a lot, and the adaptability of our environments, really continuing to move according to what a person's needs are. And Jack, your initial story really played with that well. What are some of the ways in your experience that we do, other examples of how we move from the more intensive phases of supporting someone to actually helping them to reduce their needs for us and to move out into just ordinary independence?
So often when the client gets more confident, feels a little more stable in themselves and ready to venture out more, like maybe they had a goal of getting a job. And so little by little, there's steps made. Sometimes people will go through supported employment situations before getting a regular job, for instance. And so even going to a supported employment job, then that could signal a reduction in shifts because the person's going to a shift at work for 4 hours instead of having a basic attendance shift, for instance. So that's a little stepping stone. And then the next step might be transitioning from the supported employment to a regular part-time job. And then again, the team can shrink down a little bit. And same with making friends. A lot of times a client will come in with the goal of wanting to make friends, wanting to have friends. But there's such a lack of confidence, if there's been a lot of turmoil in that person's life for a long time, that they don't feel confident to go out and make friends. And so little by little, there is a building of community and friendships. And part of that could be through Windhorse, through going to community programs and meeting other people with similar interests that way, where it's a little bit safe. And then branching out from there just to like joining a gym in the community or so yeah, with these natural things kind of increasing in the person's life, then the team, that's how the team kind of shrinks down. That's how the client starts to emancipate from the team and from the family when they have more of their own things going on.
Yeah. I could add to that. Maybe I'm thinking of the process where often, like I said earlier, that clients are very isolated and alone when they come to us, and have very low confidence in relationship. And so there can be an early phase where that's happening with the team members. And as is often the case with people, is they're not terribly flexible in how they can form relationships. And so the art of basic attendance, very much at the heart of the art of basic attendance and all the relationships in a team is the team members have to kind of adapt and go to the place where this person lives, if that makes sense. And like you have to go to where they are and start to form relationship there. And so the early phase can be just the client tolerating and starting to form relationships with team members. I know that some families are concerned if they form a dependence and connection to the team, that'll be the only place they can find it. But I think in my experience, when they form the relationships with the team members, and the team members are working a great deal to meet them there, that then the client can build some confidence, and over time they grow inside of that confidence. Sometimes I think we help people become dependent on a team, and as soon as they do and they're willing to bond and connect with the team, then the team has to shift and get them to start bonding with the world. That we're trying to work our way out of a job. We're trying to become the original connection and then move them out into whatever it is, work, education, other friendships, community programs. But then the shrink, transfer the ability to have relationship over to other people.
So often, Jack, I watch the client in relationship with the team members, and so often it's a surprise to them how likable they are. They didn't expect that. They didn't expect people to reflect, so many positive traits, like realizing that they are intelligent, realizing that they're talented, realizing that they're funny, being alone with all of the angst inside and everything, and oftentimes that kind of a negative self-talk. Without those helpful relationships, a person could get really skewed in how they think of themselves. And so such a value of the team is in those team relationships is realizing, hey, I guess I'm not so bad after all.
Yeah, I've had many families worry about their sons or daughters or sisters or whatever become overly dependent on the team. But I feel like that's a healthy dependence and a healthy attachment process with the team that bears fruit rather than being some kind of negative dependency that goes on forever. I feel like it's a very important phase of the team that, just like Jeannie and Jack, you're both saying, people come here, they've been in other programs, they've been isolated, they don't have a lot of confidence, and then forming healthy bonds and that are nutritious seem really an important part of the work that we do with the people who come to us. Yeah.
I think that's actually what you're describing there is one of the real strengths of Windhorse. Oftentimes when people come to us, they've they've had a fair amount of experience that kind of they haven't been able to attach fully to in a way that allowed them to have a recovery path. And this tailoring thing, we can really form to somebody to find where they're comfortable, get the relationships going, and then life starts from there. It's pretty amazing to watch, actually. Amazing to be part of. Yeah.
I appreciate how much the word confidence has been used here today, because that really is it. This sense of confidence, and when you're wearing the right clothes from the right tailor, you can stand upright. You can say, hey, this is my world. I belong here. And these relationships are mine. They're earned. I have real attachments, and I can take these out into the world. In our literature, we talk about how much courage comes into play when we're working in psychotherapy and working in your own recovery. Courage is at the core of it, and you can find your courage through relationships. It's there. It's always there, but you can find it through relationship. So, and as the team supervisor, watching that unfold is a very precious thing indeed.
Thank you for listening to this Windhorse Journal entry on basic attendance within the role of a team supervisor. We hope you tune in next month when we dive into basic attendance and community programs at Windhorse.
Windhorse Journal is a publication of Windhorse Community Services, supporting recovery from mental health challenges at home and in the community since 1981.